Hello, learners. So today we're going to be talking about the different compromises that postponed the Civil War and prolonged these rising tensions in this ongoing conflict. So I hope you're ready for a learning adventure. So let's get started. And we are back on our first stop in 1820. Now, in 1820, we have the very first of the compromises that we're going to be studying. It starts way back with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And the United States gets bigger and gains all this new territory. People begin moving west, which leads to this concept of manifest destiny, that we have this right, this destiny to own all this land in the West. And as things grow, then suddenly these states in Louisiana Territory are going to want to become states. These areas of land are going to want to be states. Because if you're a state, then you get representatives in the Senate, and you get to choose your own governor, you get self-government. And that's what people want. Problem is that Missouri had slaves. And there is a delicate balance in the U.S. Senate at this time because there are 11 free states and 11 slave states. And if we remember way back last semester, we know that every state gets 2 representatives in the Senate in equal numbers. So there's 22 representatives from free states and 22 representatives from slave states, which means they can block any legislation they don't like. If the North is trying to pass things to ban slavery, the South can block it. If the South is trying to pass really strict laws about escaped slaves, the North can block it. So there's this conflict that arises, and they're arguing over whether or not Missouri should be allowed in as a slave state. And some people want to allow it in, but say, oh, no slavery for you. So Henry Clay, he's going to come up with a compromise. Remember, Henry Clay was a war hawk during the War of 1812. He's also going to be really important during the American Industrial Revolution. And he's going to come up with the Missouri Compromise. First of all, Missouri is going to enter as a slave state, and Maine will enter as a free state. So this balance will be maintained. Then he's going to draw a line at the 3630. So basically right below Missouri on a picture of the United States, it's right here. You just kind of cut the United States in half. Now remember, the United States is about half as big as it is now at the time. It's just the original area we won in the American Revolution and Louisiana Territory. We don't even have Florida yet, all right? So he's going to draw a line at the 3630, and north of the line is free and south of the line is slave, which will fix the problem about Missouri, but won't fix this larger issue of slavery. And is slavery going to be allowed in these new territories? And the longer this issue goes on, the worse it's going to be, because abolition is going to start growing bigger and more influential. And the more people who want to join the cause of abolition and get rid of slavery, the more people who are going to be angry about slavery spreading into these new territories. Now, let's go take a peek at our second compromise, which happens about 8 years later in 1828. So here we are now in 1828, and we're ready to look at our second compromise that's going to help postpone the Civil War. So first of all, in 1828, you have President Andrew Jackson, and he's going to get into an argument with his own vice president, John C. Calhoun. We'll call him Crazy Calhoun, over this tariff of abominations. As we know, Andrew Jackson's nickname is I do what I want. So Andrew, I do what I want Jackson means money for roads and things like that. And then Crazy Calhoun comes in and says, this tariff punishes the South and helps the North. And of course, Andrew, I do what I don't want Jackson's are like, what if? So Crazy Calhoun actually resigns from the office of the vice presidency. He willingly steps down because he's so angry at Andrew Jackson. And South Carolina is going to threaten to nullify the tariff. Remember, nullify means to cancel. So basically, Crazy Calhoun from South Carolina is going to threaten to nullify this tariff that they don't like because they don't want to pay it. And people are like, can they even do that? Can a state nullify a federal law? And everyone's sort of like, well, we're not sure. Here's Thomas Jefferson. He tried it once. Who knows whether or not a state can nullify a law? That's unclear in the Constitution. All right. So Andrew Jackson comes back and goes, fine, pay the tax or I'm going to send the United States Army to take over your state. And then South Carolina threatens to secede. So crazy SC always wanted to secede. South Carolina secede, SC secede. They'll actually be the first state to secede when the Civil War begins. So South Carolina is always trying to secede, SC secede. So they come in and they threaten to secede. And so this conflict is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just like when you see a fight and somebody's like, no, you, and they're like, no, you, no, you, no, you. And they're getting angrier and angrier until they start to throw punches. But of course, before they can throw punches, who steps in but Henry Clay? Here he is again with his big old intense eyes. And Henry Clay comes in and he says, hey, whoa, let's compromise. Let's ignore the whole question of whether a state can nullify a law and whether or not a state can secede, and just compromise about the tax. So he comes in, he gets Andrew Jackson to step back off the tax to a slightly lower one, and then promises to lower it over 10 years, which really isn't like that big of a save, but it's enough for South Carolina to kind of back off and say, hey. But again, that solves that problem for now. But what happens the next time crazy Calhoun and South Carolina decide that they don't like what's going on with the federal government? Maybe they don't like some law about slavery. Maybe they don't like who's elected president. They still believe that they have the power and the right to secede and nullify, because that question itself is not actually answered. Now, let's go ahead and head on to our third, and to be fair, the most intense of the three compromises. Let's talk about what's going on in the meantime. Before we can get to our third compromise, we have to understand how the situation changes from 1820 in the Missouri Compromise to 1850. So during this time, we started at 11 free states and 11 slave states right before the Missouri Compromise. And then Maine and Missouri were added as part of that compromise. Well, Michigan and Arkansas are going to be added at roughly the same time. Then we're going to get Florida and Texas as slave states, and Iowa and Wisconsin as free states, all at roughly the same time as well, which will bring us to 15 free and 15 slave states. Now, if you remember, the part above the line in the Missouri Compromise had significantly more amounts of land. So bringing in Texas, while it was somewhat controversial, didn't upset people as much because they knew it would actually help keep the balance between slave and free. But then we have the Mexican-American War, and it gives us this whole bunch of new territory called the Mexican Cession. And this giant area of territory in Southwest has a big question hanging over it. Are we going to allow slavery in this new territory? Because it's not already there, because slavery was illegal in Mexico and Spain. So are we going to allow slavery in this new territory we just received? And there are 4 points of view. The first extreme view is to ban all slavery. This is the view supported by abolitionists. The second extreme point of view is to allow slavery in all new states, anywhere, and completely ignore the Missouri Compromise and the line it created. And then there are two moderate views. The first moderate view, which is favored slightly more by the North, is just to use the line from the Missouri Compromise. Let's just take it, extend it all the way across, and just use that line. Now, of course, that line's a bit problematic when you start to think about things like California, which the line runs right through the middle of California. And the second moderate view is, let's let every single new state decide for themselves. Let's let them vote on whether or not they want to have slavery. This approach is called popular sovereignty. Remember, that was one of our principles of government in Flip Rock. popular sovereignty is the idea that you are voting for what you want. So popular sovereignty is we're going to let the territories vote and decide whether or not they want to be slave or free. Problem is, this completely throws out the Missouri Compromise. So the Missouri Compromise had a good run of it. It lasts from 1820 all the way to 1850, when it's going to have to be replaced by another compromise because of something that happens in 1849. You see, we win the Mexican-American War, and we get all this land, and everybody's kind of asking this question, what about slavery? But nobody's in a rush. I mean, have you been to that territory? It's dry, it's hot. Not that many people are going to want to move there, so it's not that big a deal, right? And then in 1849, they discovered gold in California. And suddenly everybody wants to go to California. And it goes from 15,000 people in California to 100,000 people in California in 1 year. And so suddenly they're like, hey, you know what, we're big enough to be a state. So we want to be a state. And so by 1850, we just got California in 1848. By 1850, they're ready to become a state. That's how many people moved there for the gold rush. So the gold rush actually speeds up this process of this argument of having to make a decision. Because California, of course, wants to enter as a free state, but we have that balance. 15 free, 15 slave. So the North, of course, says, yes, let them in. We don't mind one more free state. And the South is all like, no, it's not fair. Don't let them in. Now, if you are looking at your information in your packet or Edgenuity, you'll see that there's a lot more to this, and it gets really complicated. President Zachary Taylor adamantly opposes any kind of compromise. He says, no, they want to come in as a free state, just let them, no compromises. But then he dies, and the new president, Millard Fillmore, who has the dorkiest name of all time, Millard Fillmore comes in, and he's all like, I'm fine with the compromise. It's okay. Yeah, we can do that. Good. And so here comes Henry Clay again. Now he's a lot older now. He's thinking, I'm getting too old for this. In fact, fun fact, Henry Clay was born in 1777 and he'll die in 1852, 2 years after his last compromise. And he'll die before the beginning of the Civil War. So he will spend most of his life keeping America out of the Civil War. With the Missouri Compromise, solving the nullification crisis, and this compromise of 1850. And the compromise of 1850 has 5 parts. And that's kind of good memorization. That's 1850, 5 parts. The 2 parts for the North are 1, they're going to end the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Now remember, Washington, D.C. is technically located in the South, in Virginia. And that's the nation's capital. And literally, you have Northern senators in the House of Representatives, people who are abolitionists and oppose slavery. But when they walk out their office door, there's people selling slaves on the streets because it was allowed. So they don't ban slavery, but they at least ban the slave trade in Washington, D.C. And secondly, California is going to enter as a free state, a massively large free state. As we know, it'll become one of the most populous states in the nation. Then the South is going to get 2 things. New Mexico and Arizona are going to get to use popular sovereignty to decide slavery in their territory. This is important because it sets a precedent that leans more toward the South for other territories. I mean, if Arizona and New Mexico are getting to vote, why not areas like Kansas, Nebraska, Montana, all of which are north of that Missouri Compromise line? So essentially, it throws out the Missouri Compromise and replaces the Missouri Compromise with this deal, popular sovereignty, each territory voting for what they want. And it passes a new, harsher, stricter fugitive slave law. This is an extremely harsh fugitive slave law that actually allows the South to have anyone in the North who helps an escaped slave be punished. You can be punished with a fine or time in jail if you are caught helping an escaped slave. Furthermore, it takes away the rights of any African American to testify in court on their own behalf. So if I accuse someone of being an escaped slave, they can't say anything about it to me. They can't even present witnesses or evidence. They're not allowed to be in court. It's just me. And this law makes it so I only need one white witness. This makes it extremely easy for these slave catchers, which is like a whole job, people who's like, I'll go catch your slave for you. These slave catchers to go into northern cities, grab random African Americans and say, oh yeah, this is definitely the slave I was looking for. Look at my one witness I brought with me. And the African American citizen can't say boo about it. So this is the Missouri Compromise, lasted for 30 years. The Compromise of 1850 will only last for 10. The last piece of it is that Texas gets its shape. This doesn't really side with anybody. This is kind of a tangential issue that needed to be settled. It does give a little bit more land to Texas and Arizona, but mostly it's just that Texas is going to get the shape we know of today. And so the Compromise of 1850 will only last for 10 years until South Carolina secedes from the Union and the Civil War begins. Let's head back home. Whew, that was quite an adventure. All right. Before we go, I just want to review these compromises one last time, and I want to throw in the compromises from last semester. It's very easy to get all these different compromises confused. We're going to focus on 4 of them. And I've given you on this anchor chart some techniques for helping you keep them straight in your head. All right. So first of all, these are our compromises from last semester. The constitutional compromises. These are compromises that were created as part of creating the Constitution and writing the Constitution and figuring out what our government was going to look like. So the first one was the Great Compromise. This is where we get Congress, GCGC, Great Compromise, get Congress. If we were in a classroom, I'd make you repeat that like 5 times for me. Remember, we have this picture here of Congress, and there's 2 halves of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, one based on population and one based on equal numbers. And that comes from the Great Compromise. The second constitutional compromise we talk about is the 3/5 compromise. And you notice the 5 kind of looks like an S, so we use that to write slaves, because the 3/5 compromise is about slaves. And basically it says for every 5 slaves you have in your state, we'll count 3 of them as people towards your number in the House of Representatives. So slave states were able to actually count the number of slaves that they had towards how many representatives they were going to get. Now, these slaves didn't get to vote or anything. It's just part of counting how many people your state has. It's part of this. Which this is a census year, 2020, and actually they're going to recount everybody in the country, and then they decide how many representatives we get in the House of Representatives based on this census. So again, it's the 3/5, like with the 5 looking like an S, is about slavery. And both of these are about representation and power. That's what both of these compromises about. They're both from the Constitution, and they're both about representation and power. So then we get to this semester and the compromises we've been talking about that I talked about in my Zoom tutoring this week and in this video. And here we have our expansion compromises. And these are all the compromises that happen as a result of our expansion into the West. So as a result of expansion, these compromises have to occur. And first you have the compromise of 1820. You can do 2 over the 0, 1820, and then you get Missouri as a slave and Maine as free. It really does, like the M just helps you remember that they each get a state, and they're going to have this line, and they draw this line. And so putting that 2 over that 0 kind of helps you remember that there's a dividing line related to the compromise of 1820. And then finally, the compromise of 1850, which has 5 parts. So you draw that 5 really big, and then you kind of write the 5 parts around it. 2 for the North, 2 for the South, and Texas just sort of hanging out there. So DC, California, because DC, the slave trade is banned. California becomes a free state. They get the Fugitive Slave Act for the South, and they're going to get popular sovereignty in Arizona and New Mexico specifically, but it's going to kind of lead to this idea of popular sovereignty for other territories as well. All right. And so both of these compromises are about slavery. So we notice how in the fall semester, both our compromises are about the same issue, and in the spring semester, both our compromises are about the same issue, slavery. So this is just an anchor chart to help you remember the 4 compromises that we've talked about in class this year. Y'all have a good day.